So welcome everyone, and today we're going to be talking about the top talent trends for 2019 because we have seen a lot of changes in workplaces. Partly it's been driven by technology, it's been driven by demographic shifts, it's been driven by changes in the way that global populations are changing, and that's all having an impact on workplaces. And so today I want to talk about some of the surprising and maybe some of the expected trends that you'll expect to see in the next few years. So if you're a leader in any sort of role, it'll be useful for you to understand some of the trends and how you can make them work for you in your workplace. So my 3 regular rules of engagement for all my webcasts. I want you to think. So this is an opportunity for you to put other distractions aside and spend some time thinking about recruiting, engaging and keeping the best talent for your workplace, which is what we'll talk about today. Also, be a bit playful here. So I'll have some interactive opportunities. So just because it's on a webcast and we can't see each other and we might be around the country or in other parts of the world, that doesn't matter. We can still be playful and engage, and I've got some opportunities for you to do that here. And I'd like you to have some real takeaways that you can put into action when you hang up at the end of this webcast. So for people who don't know me, my name's Gihan Pereira. I'm a futurist, a speaker, an author, and a workshop or masterclass facilitator. So I work with the area as a futurist. I look at what's coming up in the future. Now, a lot of people think it's all about technology, but as we'll see, technology is a big driver of it, but really it's all about people. And so in today's webcast, I want to talk about some of the people trends that are going to affect our future, and not just in the distant future in 20 or 30 years, but in the next 20 to 30 months. At the end of this webcast, I will give away, there's a little exit survey that'll pop up on your screen as we finish. And if you complete the exit survey as a thank you, I'll also send you a copy of my special report, Build Their Judgment, which is about getting your team fit for the future. So in this limited time that we've got, obviously I can't cover everything, but you'll get some ideas there, and really simple ideas that you can implement within your team and your organization. I've worked with a number of organizations, mainly around Australia and New Zealand, but also internationally, and it's really interesting to see that many of them are facing the same challenges. So whether they're large or small across different industries, whether they're well established or newer, whether they're associations or they're corporates or government or education, wherever it is, many of the people challenges they're facing are the same. Now, not necessarily at the same level and at this, not everyone's facing them all at the same time. However, you'll see that there'll be a number of common things that'll come through in today's webcast. So to get going, let's see who's in the room. So I've got a very simple poll here. There's going to be a number of polls throughout today's webcast, and this is the simplest one. So I just want to know very broadly what's your role in your organization. So let me run this poll. So let me go to that first poll. What's your main role, and launch? There's a number of new people on today's webcast. If you haven't done polling before, it's really easy. So it's anonymous. You just choose one of the answers, and it'll give us an idea of who's in the room. And I've made this pretty broad. So these are broad categories. So not everyone's going to fit into into one of those. But if you don't, can you just type in, can choose other, and just let me know in the question box what your role is. But I can see here most people have fitted into. Yeah, okay. I'll show you the results soon. Okay, great. So I'll wait till about 80% of the people have voted, which has happened now. So I'll give you 3 seconds if you haven't got your vote in yet, and then I'll share the results. So and probably won't be surprising here that if I share the results here, you'll see that, what have we got? 86% of the people here in the room are senior, at some sort of senior role, and the vast majority of them also in an HR role. I know there's some overlap there. So I've said senior leader, you might be a senior HR leader, and you might have chosen one of those two. So it's great because this is the obviously self-selecting. It's the right people in the room for today's topic. So let me hide the poll results. And so now that you know who's in the room, let's have a look at some of the content. Okay, hide the results. Good, and move on. Okay, so what's changed in the future? So, as a futurist, I've been speaking across Australia and New Zealand, around the world, for the last 6 or 7 years, and I've been interested in this area for even longer than that. And I think there's been a shift in the way that people look at the future now, especially in organizations. So, it used to be about what's the latest, greatest thing that's going to revolutionize our world in terms of technology. And people have become a little bit wary of that now. So technology, of course, continues to improve, continues to get better, but people don't just look at it now with that gaping awe that they used to 5, 6, 7 years ago. And now they're saying, and around the world, we're saying, what are the skills that we need to be able to cope with the change that technology is bringing to us? And they're not just technology skills. How can we cope with change? How can we cope with diversity? How do we, skills like collaboration? What are the people skills that we need? And now the focus has shifted again. So notice this focus on skills in the last 3 or 4 years, and now it's focused. The shift has changed. The focus has shifted again. So now we're saying there are people with those skills, and a lot of them are the Generation Y, Generation Z, who are coming through into our workplaces and coming through into the workforce, but they've got a place, they've got a choice of places to work now. So how do we create this sort of workplace that'll attract the people who've got the skills to be able to cope with the changes that this technology is bringing? So today we're going to talk about how do we create and how do we attract and create a workplace to attract and keep these best people. So that's why I want to talk about talent trends today rather than technology trends or skills trends. And if you're kind of tracking, so I publish a number of books, and if you're tracking the publication of my books, I've kind of tracked this as well. So 2011, almost a decade ago, I published my book Fast, Flat and Free, which was about businesses coping with technology, and we talked about social media, we talked about some of the technology trends that were happening at the time. And more recently, I published the book The Future of Leadership, which is looking at what leaders need to do to be able to manage and lead in an uncertain future, and that's getting very much towards the skills. And then this year, in a couple of months, woohoo, I'll be publishing my next book, Disruption by Design, which is looking at how do we disrupt rather than be disrupted. And I'm talking about not necessarily disrupting an industry, but disrupting ourselves and disrupting our own organizations. So this is a trend that I've been seeing over the last decade or so. And so very much now we're looking at skills and talent. So people have got skills, and then how do we bring them into our organizations and keep them in our organizations? The World Economic Forum last year published its Future of Jobs report, where they looked all around the world and identified the top skills that people will need for the jobs of the future. And the report doesn't look into the distant future. It only looks about 4 or 5 years ahead. So it's looking at by 2022. So in roughly 3 years from now, what are the key skills that we'll need? And for Australia, these were the 5 key skills that they identified as the leading skills we're going to need in our workforce, in our talent, to be fit for the future. And part of it's a future that we can predict, and part of it's a future that we can't see. And there's probably, if you work in HR, if you work in talent, if you work in a leadership role, there probably aren't too many surprises here. But it's really interesting to see that we're no longer looking at technical skills or knowledge skills. We're looking at both left and right brain, if you still use that terminology, both left and right brain people skills. Okay, so let's look at a big change in the dynamic of the workplace. So question here, this is not a poll question, this is not a question for you to answer, it's a rhetorical question. Have you ever been ghosted? So ghosting is a fairly recent phenomenon, and it started in the world of dating. Particularly, it's become popular with online dating. And the idea with ghosting is that you're having an interaction with a partner, and both men and women do this, and it's, as it says here, the act of suddenly ceasing all communication with somebody you're dating, but no longer wish to date, in the hope that the other person will just get the hint and leave them alone. Okay, so that's the idea of that's where that phrase ghosting came from the world of dating. And it's now moved into workplaces as well. And so there has been a recent trend, like recent as in the last month or so, where there's been a lot of conversation about workplace ghosting. So this idea that employees now will ghost employers. So if somebody applying for a job, they go through an interview, they may be coming for a second interview, and you invite them in for a second interview, but you never hear from them. They don't reply to, they don't answer the phone, they don't reply to voicemails, they don't reply to texts or emails. You just can't get in touch with them. They have ghosted you. So there's been a couple of things. So Wharton's Business School published a podcast all about workplace ghosting, and there's been some commentary around it. And I'm not going to ask you whether you've ever been ghosted by a candidate or even by an employee. So employee ghosting might be that somebody just doesn't turn up to work one day and you never hear from them again and you don't know why. And it's not I wouldn't say it's a huge trend, but it is a trend. But the reason I'm bringing this up now is that for years, for decades, the shoe's been on the other foot. So employers quite often ghost candidates and employees. So somebody might apply for a job and they might get an expression of interest from the employer, but they never hear from them again. And if not every organization does this, of course, not everybody in HR or hiring does it. However, it's been common and it's been accepted practice that we get too many applications, we get too many candidates, we just haven't got the time to reply to everyone, especially the people who are unsuccessful. We haven't got time to reply to everyone and tell them why they didn't get the job. So the employee or the candidate feels ghosted. And now the shoe's on the other foot and the dynamic has changed. So now we're shifting around now to the space where HR leaders and business owners, senior managers, team leaders are saying that the top challenge, the biggest challenge they're going to face now and in the near future is finding high quality talent. So that's the reason why we need to build what I call the best workplace on earth, which has the best talent and has the means to keep that best talent. Okay, so let's look at what your workplace might look like. And I reckon workplaces, if you think about workplace culture and you think about describing your workplace in one word, they probably it falls along a spectrum. And I've got 6 possible ways that you could describe your workplace. So what I'm going to do is I'll describe the 6 of them, and then I'll run a little poll, which we can keep anonymous, and I'll ask you to tell me which of these 6 your workplace falls into. In fact, we won't even bother about the first one because I think that if your workforce is complacent, there probably isn't anyone in this room who's in that category. So we'll take the next 5 after this. So complacent workplace is one where people don't even know that change is happening around them. They just continue doing their job as usual without worrying about the fact that the world is changing around them. There are some workplaces like that, and I hope yours is not one of them. The next one is a resistant workplace. This is where you know change is happening and you're unhappy about it, so you do everything that you can to resist the change and preserve the status quo. It's a fight that you can't win in the long term, even though in the short term you might be able to resist the change. The third one is a compliant workplace. So these are people who come to work, they know change is happening, they feel a little bit helpless and powerless, and so they just do what they're told to do. They follow instructions, follow procedures, do what their boss tells them to do, and just hope that they're going to be the last people who have to abandon ship. Okay, so I hope your workplaces aren't in those areas, but they might be, and you might recognize some elements of that in your workplace or your team culture. Crossing the line to the more positive side, because these are workplaces that drain energy, so that's why the battery level's low here. Now we're looking at the more positive side, is the engaged workplace. There's a culture where people are at least actively engaged. You wouldn't say they're highly motivated or inspired, but at least they're engaged and they're looking to do something positive about the change that's happening around them. They don't really know what to do, and you wouldn't really say that they're motivated yet, because that's the next level. So these are people who come to work and they're happy to come to work. They enjoy work. They don't look for excuses not to come to work, but they're not yet at the level where they're inspired, where work and the rest of their life are aligned. They feel like they're making a difference in the world, and they feel like work is a place where they can actually, rather than just get a paycheck, they can actually create something different and make a difference in the world. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, Where do you think your workplace is? If you had to have one word to describe your workplace, let's run a quick poll here. And as I said, let's forget about that first one. We'll say you're not complacent, but which of the other five would you say describes your, it could be your whole workforce if you're responsible for that, or it could be your team. Okay, so there's a poll. How would you describe your workplace? Okay, let's see. People are responding quickly. Good. Okay, great. Thank you very much for responding so quickly. It's great to see that we've got almost everybody's responded. So let me close the poll and share the results. Okay, so it's fantastic to see. And again, this is a little bit self-selecting, but it's great to see that we've already got more than, well, actually 75% of the people who responded say that they're on the positive side of that line. And again, I think, as I said, for this room, it's a little bit self-selecting, but it's great to see. And the reason I'm showing you this is not just to give you some idea of what your workplace is like, because you probably know that already, but to make the point that the best people, the highest quality talent, are going to look for the right-hand side of this slide. Ideally, they want a workplace where they feel inspired, if not motivated, but definitely it's got to be those top two, motivated or inspired. And if your workplace isn't providing that, they'll find another workplace that is. So let me just hide that so you can see those slides again. So we want a workplace that's motivated or inspired, where the people feel motivated or inspired. And engage is the first step, but definitely not on the left-hand side there. So Harvard did some research, and they published it in the Harvard Business Review, the 5 things that make up the best workplace on earth. And I speak about this in many of my keynote presentations. And I know that the people here, some people here on this webcast today would have heard me talk about this before, but let me do a quick review for those who haven't seen it. The 5 things that make up the best workplace on earth are: number 1, about identity and diversity. So let me be myself. Number 2 is about authority. So help me get stuff done without having to come back to you every time something new appears on the horizon and new information appears. Give me the authority to do things. Number 3 is about my talent. So first of all, help me build my own talent, but also take advantage of the talent that I've got to build the talent of other people in the team. Give me work that's meaningful, not just menial. And I know even though we need procedures and systems and checklists and processes, don't get in the way with stupid rules. Okay, so those are 5 things that we're looking for in the best workplace on earth. So diversity, authority, talent, meaning, and good judgment. So if we go back to those things make up the best workplace on earth. So if we go back to this culture map, and I say, what's your workplace like? Well, the best workplaces do have talent and diversity. There's no question about that. But if you want to shift to the right-hand side of this slide, then if your workplace is compliant, and a few people did say that their workplace is compliant, give people more authority so they can take action themselves without having to come back to you all the time, because that moves your workplace from compliant to engaged. If you've got an engaged workforce, but you want to motivate them, give them work that's got meaning. So there's a lot of talk about employee engagement, and people do a lot of employment engagement initiatives, but you can save yourself a lot of time and effort by creating a workplace where people do work that's meaningful, and then they're automatically engaged. And also, the best people, the top quality talent, they don't want beanbags and foosball tables and going out and doing ropes courses, those sort of things that people used to do in the 80s and 90s. They actually want work that's meaningful. And if you then want a workplace and a culture that's inspired, then allow them to exercise their judgment. So that's what we're looking for. So we're looking for a workforce and a workplace which is up this end on the right-hand side, motivated and inspired. Okay, so that's a little bit about the workplace. Let's look at some of the trends, some of the talent trends that people are identifying around the world. And where possible, I'm going to focus on Australia as well. Some of this research is worldwide, some of it's specific to Australia. And the way we're going to do it, rather than me just showing you some boring stats and data, is we're going to do it with kind of like a little bit of a quiz. We're going to use the poll software for some quizzes. But before we do that, let me just go back to this slide here, and let me just stop and see if there's any questions about this, like what's your workplace culture, and if you want me to clarify any of these things here: diversity, talent, authority, meaning, and judgment. So if you've got questions, type them in the question box and I'll read them out. I'll keep this anonymous, so I won't say who's typed in the question, but I can answer them for the benefit of everybody else. Okay, so I don't see anything yet, so let me continue then. Okay, so here's the first question. So this is a report. This is a report from Cone Communications in the USA, a study that they did, and they were looking at Gen Y and what are the sort of things that motivate Gen Y in the workplace. So Gen Y is, well, it used to be the biggest generational group in the workplace. It's at the moment it still is, but it's soon going to be overtaken by the Gen Zs, which are the biggest demographic group in society. But so they said that 2/3 of Gen Y won't take a job if a company doesn't have what? So let's do this. Let's have a bit of fun with this. So let me launch the poll here. So it's one of those four things. So what do Gen Ys, the millennials, want from their workplace? 64% of them said this. Was it flexible working hours, strong corporate social responsibility? Do they want online learning tools or childcare facilities? So obviously all of the answers appeared on the poll, but which is the one that 2/3 of people, the Gen Y, said was the biggest factor out of those four. Okay, good. Most people have voted, and yeah, great. Most people got the right answer for this one. So people said flexible working hours and strong CSR, and in fact, the answer was, strong CSR values. So according to Cone Communications, we hide that, 2/3 of Gen Y, so roughly 2/3 of Gen Y won't take a job if a company doesn't have strong corporate and social responsibility values. And that comes back to meaningful work. So CSR can't be something that's an adjunct to work anymore. It's not just a little side thing that you do with 3% of your profits. It's something that's part of your workplace. So what you're looking for and what the top talent's looking for is that when they come to work, that their workplace and their employer helps them be on a shared journey. So it's a difference between offering a salaried job and helping them being on a shared journey. So reasonable workplaces will help their customers solve problems or help them achieve their goals. That's great. That's really good, but that's just a baseline now. That's just the price of entry. So now the top talent want people who will help them with their mission, their values, and their purpose. So if you can provide them, great, fantastic. If you can't, then it's much more of a challenge to attract in the first place, and then keep the people keep the top people in your workforce. Okay, so let me ask this question. This is a rhetorical question, but it's a really important question that you should be asking for your team and your organization. What's your big idea? What's the idea that's going to change the world for people? And Sam Schillace, who's the CEO of Box is a company like Dropbox, he said it best, and I love quoting him here. He says, if 80% think it's the most stupid idea they've ever seen, and 20% are going to stand behind you because they think it's the best thing, then you've probably got something. So it's something that doesn't have to be controversial, but it could be unpopular. It could be something that not many people think is going to be successful. And when you look at your leadership, then I think you should be looking at what level you're playing at. So when you're looking at going from A to Z, if this is your vision, the people who are managers, and there's nothing wrong with any of these three levels, by the way, but people who are managers do bit by bit innovation. So just making small changes. People who are real leaders do goal or project-based innovation, so A to G. And the people who are transformational leaders, they do A to X. So they're on a quest. They don't necessarily know where they're heading and how they're going to get there, but they're going to set that vision and help bring people along with them. So what's your big idea? And I reckon that's the first thing you should do. It's something that you can't do in 2 minutes in a webcast, but it's something that you should be looking at as an organization and for your team to attract and keep the best talent. Okay, let's go for the next question. So the next question, so this is some research done in Australia. So what would Australian workers be most willing to accept a pay cut for? Okay, so let me share this with you. What would Australian workers be most willing to share pay cut for? Okay, so you can see the poll here, and so all four of these did appear as responses in the poll, but one of them was higher than the others. Okay, I would say that the people who voted very quickly, the first few got the answer right. So at 100% on the right answer. It's now shifting a little bit, so there's more of a even distribution, but let's see what we come up with. Great. Okay, most people have voted, so I'm going to share the answer. Okay. So we can see here most people said flexible working hours and working from home. So flexible working hours was the highest. Oh, sorry, actually more holidays and working from home were equal there. Okay, so correct. That's exactly right. So most people said, let me show the results here. So this was some research done very recently that said almost half of Australian workers would be willing to accept a pay cut for more flexible working hours. The second most popular response was being able to work from home sometimes. So the people who said working from home, you're pretty much right as well. Okay, so 47% of people for flexible working hours, 40% working from home. Now, you can't just add them up and say 87% total because this survey allowed people to respond with more than one, but a lot of Australians and global Western countries also saying that people want more flexibility in their work. So that's something that if you are not already offering that, it's something to consider. And it doesn't mean that you have to let people work from home all the time. And it doesn't mean that you have to provide full flexibility of working hours, come in whenever you like, leave whenever you like, but some flexibility is really valuable. And in fact, if you go back to the books that I showed you when I've written books and I published them, this is a trend that I saw a long, long time ago. And in fact, in addition to these three books, I wrote with my friend Dr. Chris Pudney another book way back around 2011, 2012, Out of Office, which was written from the employee's point of view. So it wasn't written from the employer's point of view, but how if you were an employee who wanted more flexibility and to work from home or to work part-time from home, then here's how you could do that. So I could see that trend. I could see that happening from a long time ago, and it's become even more important now. It's become more pronounced now. At the time, it was seen as a privilege, but now workers, employees, especially the top talent, are seeing that as a right and an expectation. And if you don't provide that flexibility in your workplace, it's very difficult for you to attract the best people. Let me tell you a story about Steve Shirley, who set this up more than 50 years ago. So Steve Shirley set up a software company way back in the 1960s. And Shirley set this up in the UK. So this is in the very, very early days of computing. There was obviously no internet, no smartphones, no even desktop computers. So this is what those computer systems looked like at that time. And what Steve Shirley did was quite revolutionary. So that workplace had three things that were quite different. And number one, it was a technical workplace. So he was using computers, which are pretty new at the time. The second thing was Steve Shirley didn't want to work in areas that traditionally computers were being used for at the time, which is banking and finance. So the company worked in things like aerospace. The third thing was that the company there's actually four things, because the third thing was that the company was staffed almost entirely by women, which was, again, very unusual at the time. And the fourth thing was that the company, most of the staff worked remotely. So they worked around the UK. And this is in the time of data processing with cards. So every day, these programmers around the UK, these women, would do their programming by programming onto a card. They'd send it through Royal Mail, which would pick up the mail twice a day, it'd be sent back to London. The cards would be fed into these massive computers here. It would spew out the results overnight, send them back to the workers, who would then make the changes for any bugs, and they would solve those programs. So if that could happen almost 60 years ago now. There's no reason why we can't have more flexible work now and distributed work now. By the way, the person I've been calling Steve Shirley is actually Dame Stephanie Shirley, and she used to call herself Steve because at the time it was very unusual for a woman to be running any company, let alone a technology company. So she used to sign her name as Steve Shirley in memos when she was trying to make appointments, and then she'd walk into the meeting and just then she'd get the meetings which she wouldn't have got if she signed her name Stephanie. If you want to know more about her story, you should definitely watch the TED Talk, Why Do Ambitious Women Have Flat Heads? It's a great talk by Stephanie Shirley, Dame Stephanie Shirley, but particularly because it talks about not just about diversity and different ways of work, but also because the point I'm making is that even in the 1960s, the concept of having flexible work was a possibility, and it's even more so now. And I reckon this is what's happening. This is what's happening to our workplaces. So in the past, flexible work and working, especially remote work, meant that you were on the phone. And it wasn't that great because you had to be on the phone. You couldn't see people. You couldn't have meetings with them. Now we can have webcams and video conferencing, and people are doing it through Facebook and Skype and lots of other tools. And in the future, it might even be virtual reality. So if you're going to be ready for this future of work and to have the best workplace on earth, then you should be thinking about flexibility in the workplace. Just one little caveat to that, and I won't do this one as a poll, but if I asked you in Australia how many workers worry that flexible work affects their promotion opportunities, there's a real concern. So 36% of workers, there's a significant amount of people, worry that if they have flexible work, then they're likely to be negatively affected when it comes to promotion, because there's a perception that employers, leaders, managers think less of them because they're not fully committed. They want flexible working hours. Perhaps they've got childcare responsibilities. Perhaps they're working from home, so they miss out on going to meetings, important meetings. So people have to work around them. That's a perception. It doesn't have to be the reality, but there is a perception. So it does require a little change in mentality from the organization to encourage and embrace flexible work, not just to tolerate it and to accommodate it, because people are worried that as much as they want flexible work, that it does affect their career path. If you want to know more about this, this is a really big topic. The Out of Office book that I wrote a while ago, that's now out of print because it was written quite a few years ago. So some of the content there is not so relevant anymore. But I wrote more recently an article for Smart Company about flexible work. And if you follow me on LinkedIn and you follow my newsletters and blogs, you'll see I talk quite a lot about flexible work. It's a really important part of the future workforce. Okay, so the next one, let's look at another area, which is a trend. So inclusive teams. So I'm looking at inclusion and diversity here. Let's do the poll. Okay. Employees in inclusive team are okay. Which one of these four things is true? This is a report done by Suncorp with the government department in Australia around inclusion at work. Okay, the response is a little bit slow. Oh, they're coming in now. Good. Great to see. Okay, great. So most people have responded. So let me share the results and we'll see what the room here thinks. Okay, interesting. So the room, it's kind of evenly split. There's responses for all of them. Probably the less... Okay, so the lowest one is the innovation one. Okay, so this is a bit of a trick question because the correct answer is all of the above. So inclusion and diversity and inclusion create greater productivity, innovation, retention, and job satisfaction. So absolutely now. And if you engage in any of the HR talent people conversations that are going on in workplaces now, diversity and inclusion are a big part of that. And not just because it's a nice thing to do or the right thing to do in terms of Me Too movements and societal trends, but because actually diverse teams are essential for us being fit for the future. Because, and I'll just do this when I run my workshops, we go through this in a lot more detail, but let me show you this model, looking at the way that you have thinking. So, you might have a team which is very similar, so not very diverse, or you might have diversity. And when you're looking at goals and activities, you might have vague goals and activities versus focused. So this gives you 4 categories. So one is where you've got a group of very similar people working on vague goals. So this is routine work, and that generally only requires fixed thinking because people know what they have to do. They've done it before. There's no real clashes. That's fine for routine work. And there is some routine work involved, but that's not good enough for being fit for the future. So what leaders and managers often try to do is they set goals, create strategies and vision, but they've still got this team that's not very diverse. And what happens then is that you have narrow thinking because you've got everybody with the same expertise, background, experience, and they all think the same way. So it actually narrows their thinking rather than widening it. If you do want to have wider thinking, what you do is have a more diverse team. But again, you can't just have a wide team working on vague goals or vague ideas because you get a lot of wasted time there. So what you really want is this 4th area, which is sharp thinking, where you've got a diverse team and focused with very specific goals in mind. And that's where you tap into the diversity of your team and the diversity of thinking from different people. And it absolutely is the way to be fit for the future because the old hierarchical thinking with the pyramid, with the sharp end at the top, the more senior people at the top, is just not the way that leadership works now because those people they don't necessarily have all the answers now. Whereas in the past, the people with more seniority had more experience, more expertise, therefore they did have the answers. It's just not the case anymore. So I won't go into a lot of detail about that, but it's absolutely essential that you have diverse thinking, sharp thinking in your team, which comes from having more diversity in your team. Okay, and then the last one that I want to talk about is one that there's been a lot of discussion about, and it seems like the elephant in the room. If I didn't talk about it, let's talk about robotics, artificial intelligence, and automation. So how many jobs in Australia are likely to be automated in the next decade and a half? Okay, so last poll here. So this is a report, I think it was an Australian government report, Australia's future workforce, and they had a look into the future and this is how many jobs are likely to be automated. So in other words, replaced by robots, which is physical automation, or artificial intelligence, which is software automation. So how many people are going to lose their jobs as a result of automation? Oh, good. Okay. Most people have voted very quickly here. So let me share the results. Yeah, great. Okay, so this is a very, very smart, savvy room here because the answer is exactly right. So the answer is in this sort of range. Okay, so and I've asked this question to audiences, to other groups, and most people don't have any idea. Most people think it's higher than this. So let me show you just a slide with the results on it, which is that 40% of jobs in Australia are likely to be automated in the next 10 to 15 years. So it's not as high as a lot of people think. Most people think it's higher, and there's some futurists for predicting that everyone's going to lose their job by 2030, and that's just not the case. So it's significant. 40% is still significant, but it's not as high as some people say. However, lots of leaders, managers, and directors are now saying that they expect their employees to understand how to work as integrated teams with machines. So machines, again, could be actual robots, physical robots, it could be artificial intelligence within the next few years. So leaders are looking at gearing up their teams to work as humans and machines together. And I always think it's better, we're better together but rather than saying that robots are going to take our jobs. They're not. They're going to augment and enhance our jobs. So if you don't already have some sort of strategy, or you're not thinking about engaging and integrating artificial intelligence and robotics into your workplace, then you should be thinking about that. And also helping the humans who work with you integrate and engage more with that. Now, that's already happening. It's already happening in a number of different areas, and you probably know it's already happening in your workplace. Anyway, it's certainly happening in people's personal lives when they use things like Siri or Google Homes or Google Maps or any of that sort of predictive technology that's already has artificial intelligence behind it. That's happening in their lives. So, they are familiar with the idea. It's just a case that they may be not so familiar with it at work. And the big challenge for a lot of people is that many people think it's a bit further off than it really is, but it's not. It's actually close by. And let me do this simple question, a little simple exercise that might help you understand this a little bit better. So I'm going to ask you to type in the question box, and there's an answer to this question. It's a little bit of a puzzle, and the first person who answers it correctly, I'll tell you who they are. And there's no prize except the glory of everybody else here on the webcast and people who are watching the recording later. So let me tell you the puzzle. There's a lily pad, which is empty except for one lily in it. There's a lake with a lily pad, which has got one lily on it. Okay, now, it doubles every day. So the next day there's 2 lilies and so on. The next day there's 4. The next day there's 8, 16, 32, and so on. After 30 days, the pond is full. The question is, get ready to type in your answer. When is it half full? After how many days is it half full? Okay, I'm just waiting for an answer here. Yeah, Jim. Okay, great. Yep, so the correct answer is 29 days. Okay, so a common answer is, of course, 15 days because it's half of 30, but actually on the 29th day, it's half full. And then the day after that, it fills because it fills up on the very last day. So it's a little bit of a trick question, and it's a question that you see in many puzzle books, or you go to quiz nights and people ask this question. And of course, the obvious answer, which is half of 30, is the incorrect answer. But the point I'm making, and the reason I'm doing this here, is to point out just people don't really understand exponential growth very well. So let's work backwards from that. So 30 days, the pond is completely full. So the green part shows how much is full. The day before that, it was half full, and then it doubled. Let's go back a week. So we'll do 7 days. The day before that, it was only a quarter full. The day before that, an 8th, a 16th, a 32nd, and a 64th. So if you look back a week before the pond was full, only a tiny percentage of it was full. And then remember, there's 23 days before that, and it's tiny, tiny percentages, smaller than I could show on the slide even, all the way back. And then suddenly, in the very last week, in fact, you could even say in the very last 5 days, it dramatically fills up. And this is what exponential growth is. So there are a lot of things happening in robotics, artificial intelligence, in software, and the way that software is developing that's going to grow exponentially. And there are a lot of people who aren't aware of that and aren't really expecting it because they're thinking there's kind of like back here at day 24, and they think, oh, actually, it's only going to have a tiny little impact on us. But this is what's happening now. Over the next few days, metaphorically, exponential growth means that it's going to have a much faster impact than most people are expecting. So we're going to have things like this. So we've got robots and artificial intelligence doing a number of things already, and they're only going to get better. So I'm not going to go through these in detail, but let me just talk about a couple of them. For example, with training and development, rather than pushing people into training courses and getting them with a one-size-fits-all training, so everybody you assume they're at the same level, so they're going to a training workshop, there'll be a lot more online training, and there'll be artificial intelligence that's based, so somebody does some sort of online training module, based on what they did, the AI will recommend what to do next, or it will recommend what they should go back and revise. They will combine with, so AI will combine with the Internet of Things. So let me highlight a couple of these. So online training, combining with the Internet of Things. So we'll have a lot of more internet connected devices. So they'll be doing things like monitoring employees in the workplace, not for sinister reasons, but for things like safety, for productivity, for collaboration. And they will be able to make predictions and help people that help people work more effectively. They'll be able to predict people issues. So based on what people are doing in ways that humans can't predict, AI may be able to predict that somebody is dissatisfied with their job or they are thinking of moving. And it's not because they're reading the email that's being sent through the server. It's just based on their behaviors in the workplace. So there's sentiment analysis is where AI already can do this, where it can look at, for example, a whole bunch of tweets or responses on your Facebook page and interpret that and say, our customers feel this way. Or if you're using something like internal social media networks, you can say, actually, our people aren't feeling so good at the moment, and the AI can do some early warnings and some predictions for you. Any quick questions about that before we finish up? Sales coaching. So let me just do that one last one then. So sales coaching came up from Jim. So this one, sales coaching, is where AI could be listening into sales phone calls, and because it can understand language, it can interpret language, as we already can with things like Siri and Google Home. It can then offer coaching to salespeople on the quality of their call and ways that they could improve their sales techniques. And it could be sales, it could be customer service, it could be any sort of engagement that happens over the phone, or maybe even in person, because you could have devices that are listening with the intent of being able to do coaching later. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. I hope you found that really useful to understand some of the trends that are coming up in the near future. As I said, if you complete the exit survey, which will come up in a couple of minutes, then I'll send you a copy of my Build Their Judgment special report, which has got 23 little ideas, fairly simple ideas, that you can put into place to get your team fit for the future. And I picked this one around judgment because if you remember, judgment is the thing that you need to get your team inspired. It's at the very right end. The best teams are teams where people are allowed to and encouraged to use their judgment. All those other things need to be in place first as well, but using their judgment is really important. So if you'd like to engage with me more, I'd love to work with you and your teams. I've got a conference keynote, a new keynote called The Best Workplace on Earth, where we talk about this. But if you've seen me present keynotes, you know that it's not a teaching environment. It's more engaging, entertaining, humorous. And so if you want me to talk to leaders in particular about best workplace on earth, or to your people, we'll have a slightly different angle around that. I've got a keynote presentation around that, as well as a half-day workshop. So if you want me to come in and work with your leaders about developing the ideas that we've talked about here to help you create the best workplace on earth, please do that. And also a lot of organizations now are getting me to come in and do some strategic planning where we identify where you are in terms of how well you've got the best workplace on earth, what do you need to do to get to that point. So a story that I often finish many of my webcasts and presentations with is this one here. It's a rhetorical question. If I say to you, is this a heap of sand? Assuming these are grains of sand here, you'd say yes. Now, if I take away one grain of sand, is it still a heap of sand? Again, yes. If I take away another, I could take away thousands of grains of sand, and that would still remain a heap of sand. But eventually, if I kept going, and eventually there's just a few grains of sand sitting there, you'd say, no, that's not a heap of sand anymore. And my question is, when did it stop being a heap of sand? And the answer is there's no real answer. There's no one grain of sand that goes from heap to not heap. And yet, you know that eventually it's going to go to not heap. You just can't tell when it's going to happen. And I reckon disruption's very much like this. The disruption very rarely happens overnight. It's almost always happening one grain of sand at a time. So a customer goes somewhere else, or you lose a team member, or you don't happen to attract the perfect team member that you wanted because they went somewhere else. Or you may find that a whole bunch of people leave, or something you say gets spread on social media and affects everybody, and it means it's harder for you to attract the best people. Or something happens where you lose somebody because they're moving they're moving somewhere else, or they wanted more flexible working hours and you weren't able to accommodate them. And each of those individual grains of sand, you might think don't make any difference, but eventually you might wake up one day and find that you don't have a heap of sand anymore. So don't wait and don't be complacent. To be fit for the future, look at each of those individual grains of sand as potential early warning signs. And I hope you've got some ideas today to help you build the best workplace on earth. If you'd like to get in touch with me, gihanprera.com has all my contact details. And as I said at the start, I want this to be something where you can take some actions and put them into practice. So I hope you've got that. If you'd like to share some ideas with me, please email me as well. You can find all my contact details there. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.